Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. Chris, I think an appropriate subject today, since we usually talk about economics and frequently mention the Fed on Fridays, we have an opportune time to celebrate or lament the changes in the Federal Reserve policy, at least as announced. And that was the Powell announcements yesterday and the meeting that they had in Jackson Hole. But quite frankly, nothing is ever new under the sun when you come to monetary policy in a fiat system. They have nothing new because they can't get rid of the old. And that's what they're trying to do, manage something that's unmanageable. So they've known for a long time that there were problems with this and discussion, but Powell was supposed to straighten this all out. So he was announcing, something to do with the inflation. There's not enough inflation. This has always been the most bizarre position of any reasonably sane government would pursue. It is deliberate inflation. They always inflate, but they do it sort of secretly and quietly because they spend money and then they inflate and print money. But no, in the last couple of years, they're making the claim, there's no inflation, and the economy is threatening. And so we have to get the inflation going. And besides, the politicians don't like it when you don't have, enough need to keep inflating the currency. So they deny there is any. And you and I, Chris, have talked a lot, and there's a lot of inflation because in Austrian economics, inflation is measured by the money supply. So it's what the Fed does, the printing of money. M2 is a much better measurement than, say, the CPI. But they never mention that. They just talk about why inflation has to come back. Because there's a big contest going on. It's between, the market says, well, when you spend too much, you have too much debt, and there's a lot of malinvestment, and the economy is not doing well, and the bubble has burst, then you have to correct it, allow it to happen. You can't keep propping it up. And this is why many people early on, years ago, said this will end badly because eventually just tinkering on the edges with interest rates, we had interest rates, back in the 70s all the way up to 21%, and they have systematically lowered them to stimulate things, and the conditions allowed that to help superficially. And now, of course, it was recognized that it would eventually quit working. So there were people early on who predicted this will take us to zero interest rates. And of course, that's where we are in real terms. The interest rates are zero. But I think the frustration that they have is the fact that they're trying to make a system work that is unworkable. And they believe they can do it. So you just, if it doesn't work well, get a new Federal Reserve chairman. But the one thing they don't talk, and I think, Chris, you will recognize this in the last couple of days when they looked at monetary policy and even what's going on politically in the system, with the presidential race. Nobody talks about, in real terms, spending. Nobody talks about deficits. Nobody talks about financing the welfare warfare state. Nobody talks about really shrinking the government. They talk about how are we going to hide things? How are we going to convince the people everything is okay? And that's what this is all about. And they make these announcements. But, and I know you look at all the financial reports, Chris, and a lot of people are waking up and there's not that much trust in the Federal Reserve anymore. They're not going to listen, they've solved our problem, we're going to be okay. That was the attitude back in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. And the markets responded in a very favorable manner. They said, now they're going to do something. I don't think those conditions exist today, Chris, so I think it's going to be more, they're going to have to do more than just a bunch of talk that has no effect, because I think they're in a mess. They're between the rock and the hard place, and they're going to have to do more than just talk.
That's right, Dr. Paul. And they have something called a target inflation rate. That they want to hit 2% inflation as their goal, which is totally ridiculous. There doesn't need to be any inflation. In fact, there shouldn't be. And it's as if a thief comes up to you and announces how much he intends to steal from you, before he grabs your wallet. That's basically what they're doing. And now they're averaging it. average inflation. So if they say that inflation was 1% last year, yeah, right, and this year it's 5%, well, to them, in their eyes, it's actually 3%. They're just making up for what they didn't steal in purchasing power from you before. And all of this, like you said, it's just an excuse. They're trying to just justify somehow counterfeiting, which should be illegal. And mind you, that we're already, every move that we make is already taxed by government as it is. So now we have these people that are unelected, they're totally shielded from the public. We have no say in any of this, that are, they're just telling us how much they're going to take from us. And that's why, the Fed is the pinnacle of what is known as the deep state. They are the ones that make the whole thing run, the whole big government system. But like you said, Dr. Paul, it is unraveling. They are not in control. In fact, it's further, spiraling out of control.
Yeah, this notion that if I want to get inflation going well, it'll be a sign of a healthy economy. And that's what they believed in the past. We thought at one time they gave up on it. And this is nothing more than a modified Phillips curve. They're talking about sacrificing inflation. We'll suffer along with the inflation because it's going to make us a healthy economy. And that's what the argument was in the 70s. But that whole principle was supposed to have been totally reputed because it didn't work. Then we ended up with inflation rates up to 15 to 20%, and we were in a bad recession. So there was a deflationary type of recession, and this is something they say, oh, that's why we have to get inflation going. So they think if you inflate, print money, and get the prices going up, it's a sign of prosperity, because they know that when you have true deflation, prices go down. And they remember the Depression, and there was true deflation, and the economy was very weak. But just like there was an inflationary recession back in the 70s, you can have an inflationary depression too. And that's what you witness in these countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe. There's a lot of inflation, but there's no economic growth. So this is all silly stuff that they do. Even if they achieve what they want, let's say they go, and I don't know how far back they're going to average, but let's say they take a 5-year average and they're going to maintain it. And what they're doing, it should be very, very strong evidence about what will happen to gold. They average them in. It means they're going to print like crazy, and to increase the money supply. But nobody knows exactly where that money goes, and that is the problem. It may go into the military budget and not into new businesses that produce and create real jobs. And this is the big fallacy. They're still locked in Keynesian economics, where they say, if we just print and lower interest rates, we're going to have a healthy economy. Well, I think those days are over. I think most people know it's over. Then when you run into problems like the streets are burning up because the Marxists are gaining an edge, at the same time we have the serious complications of overreacting to the coronavirus, and then also if you're refusing to even acknowledge that this all started by the Fed's financial bubble collapsing. And you put it all together, and they don't talk about the problems. They don't talk about the spending and the cutting back and sound money. The one big thing is this whole idea of interest rates. If they can fix the inflation rate, they think they can do anything. So they claim they can fix the interest rates. They can't. They do temporarily, and they monkey around, but if they can destroy it, you destroy the most important price in the marketplace. And that's what happened when they put on wage and price controls back in 1971. They had and closed the gold window. They put these controls on, and it really seized up the economy, and the economy just did so poorly on that. I remember that day very well. In August 15th of 71, which was a Sunday night, the next day I was interested in seeing what happened. And I had just joined, I was early in my medical practice, but I had joined the Chamber of Commerce, their free enterprise business group. So I joined, and there was the meeting. It was a small group of people meeting, and they were going over the announcement, what Nixon did, and there were tariffs and taxes and regulations, wage and price controls, close the gold window. And I thought, what, I guess, and the little committee had to write or the purpose is send the message to the national chamber on what our opinion was. Well, the whole country and what the opinion was of the Chamber of Commerce nationally was, this is wonderful. And that's when after that meeting, I said, there is something seriously wrong, because by that time I had an exposure to economics and thought places like the Chamber of Commerce would help. And, nothing has really changed. Right now there's a political fight over the Chamber of Commerce actually supporting a bunch of Democrats, but it really is logical when you realize they're not free market people. They're very much interventionists, and the logic is they're interventionists and they're big spending. The Chamber of Commerce is not going to help us restore, sanity to our economy, but they generally have been Republican. But some of the Republican leaders now are very, very upset, that they're supporting some Democrats. But this just tells you what's going on and why the answers aren't there. The answers are to come outside of that system, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, whether it's universities, or whether it's our politicians. They're not going to answer the question. And yet, right now, they know there's something wrong and they're struggling, but they're just still coming up with the same old answers. Print more money, get involved, and bail everybody out. So, Chris, I'm going to make a rare prediction, very dangerous. This isn't going to work. There's all this planning, and Powell is not going to save the day.
That's right, Dr. Paul. And, it's the philosophy that we try to point out. The role of government has been flipped upside down. The role of government should be to protect our liberty. People live their lives freely, and government is there in case somebody commits violence, fraud, something like that. Today, government is seen as society, as running society. They believe it. People believe that they should run society. And look what they do. They run it totally into the ground. Look what they did with coronavirus, with all the lockdowns and unemployment and all the livelihoods that are ruined. And they're just going to continue. Now we have state and local governments that in this environment want to raise taxes. And then you have the Fed that is saying that they're going to drive up prices by counterfeiting dollars. And they know that people are struggling. I have a quote from them that says, quote, and we're certainly mindful that higher prices for essential items such as food, gasoline, and shelter add to the burdens faced by many families. So they know that people are already struggling, yet they're going to counterfeit, they're going to drive up prices, taxes are going to go up. Government is a menace to society, and the right role for it is to go back to protecting our liberties.
A lot of people still believe that this all started with coronavirus and that caused the crisis. I argue the case that it was the Federal Reserve that created the bubble, and the bubble was bursting, last year, and they had to make adjustments and hide what was going on. And coronavirus, if anything, if it's connected, it's probably a deliberate distortion and a distraction, because, from our viewpoint, it's a serious, serious problem, the coronavirus, but compared to other things, not so bad. Influenza has killed as many people and all these problems. But they're using that to scare people even more. But in coronavirus, we argue the case that they have bad data on how they can scare people into, capitulating and doing anything and roll over. Don't send your kids to school. Don't go out, and all that stuff that goes on. But the government sends out bad information on inflation, for instance. They say, we are trying to get it up to 2%. Could talk to somebody that goes and buys their grocery. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. If you're in low, middle income, your inflation rate might be much bigger. So those statistics really don't hold up. For instance, this week when they reported the durable goods order, fantastic. The stock market said, good. And when stocks are going up, everybody's happy, supposedly. So they said the durable goods orders up over 11%. Well, that's pretty good, especially when it was predicted only to go up a couple percentage points. And here it is that 1.9% of it went into building military weaponry, airplanes and things like that. That should be subtracted, because that money was taken out of our economy. You say, we have to have national defense, but we don't have to have more than the 10 largest other countries in the world. I think we have enough weaponry. We need more common sense and maybe a better foreign policy. But there's a lot of fake news in the management of the coronavirus. There's a lot of fake news in order to get people complacent about the economy. Likewise, more people are waking up about coronavirus that maybe kids ought to be in school, and there's a lot of people not buying into all these statistics, and there are more people, although not enough, are thinking about maybe it has something to do with the Federal Reserve. Maybe they're mismanaging things. Maybe we ought to have a backing to our currency, and there are a lot. At least we get to meet a lot, and we have a lot of viewers that believe that. So this is something that is ongoing because our target for this information is trying to get people's minds changed that has anything to do with government. That's a job and a half. But eventually you have to get the people to change their mind and understand. Just like in the 60s, I was reading Austrian economics, and that's why I had a perception that was different and trying to cancel out all the economics I was taught in college. So this is where the action should be. This is what we hope we can contribute to, is an understanding how free markets work, why that is following the principles of liberty. Then I think we can get to the bottom of it. But these pronouncements by the Federal Reserve and coming up with gimmicks and saying, well, we'll just average the inflation rate. I predict, though, inflation will come back. The kind that they don't want to even mention, the kind that affects everyday living, more so than now, and that the CPI is going to go up. And then you're going to hear talk about how do we control inflation, because they don't have a switch. They couldn't turn it on and send the money in the places they wanted, and they won't be able to turn it off when people lose confidence in the dollar.
Great, Dr. Paul. I'll finish up by addressing a question that we often get and we don't have the answer. And it's how long, we point out this madness and it's insanity, but how long can this go on? And unlike politicians and central bankers, we realize that life is far too complex to give an answer to that. We can't say, well, this will happen and it'll be followed by this and then this. But we do know, if we look at it, let's say you wanted to set up your own little Federal Reserve. It's only a matter of scale. If you did it just in your town, you would quickly be routed out, tarred and feathered. You wouldn't last very long. But what if your scheme was statewide? Well, maybe you'd have a little more time. Well, how about countrywide? Now you really have time on your side and you can milk the population for a long time. This is a big operation. Well, the US dollar and the Federal Reserve, this is a worldwide system. And that's why it takes a lot of time for it to unravel. And each time, they're at the point where they think that they're the masters of the universe. You look at the politicians, they've all lost their minds because they have this printing press where they think that they can run the world. The silver lining to all this is it didn't just begin. This is a long time coming. It's over 100 years old, and the same principles apply, whether it's a small town or worldwide. It's going to unravel. It has to fail. We just have to acknowledge that we're ignorant and we don't know the step-by-step process that's going to happen. Very,
very good. And I think the evidence is very clear that the policies aren't working. Beginning of last year, they had started for several months. They wanted to correct this. They said that, we can't keep building the balance sheet. We can't have the Fed keep buying because this old-fashioned notion that eventually that's going to cause a problem and you ruin everything. But they did it for 6 or 8 months, and the economy was getting weaker. So the people started lobbying for a change. But the market was speaking in September, and it was September 17th of last year, where the overnight rates all of a sudden soared to 10%. And they were down very low, like 1% or so. And they were, because the government was fixing the rate. But boy, that sent out a panic. So they had to say, we have to give up on this pretense that we're going to restore order by not constant inflation. And then they started buying corporate bonds and corporate and stocks. I'm sure they're involved in that. I'm sure the government never hesitate. If they need to, they'll get involved in the gold market. So they have been doing this all along, and they think that's going to solve the problem. But they've given up on this whole idea that they can work their way out of this and rebuild and have a more sensible balance sheet and have a money management. The only management they do now is AOC has won. I think she's the one that said, why don't you try modern monetary theory? Us Marxists, we love it. And this is what they're doing. But modern monetary theory really had its birthing in 1971 when that last link was removed from gold, because that meant they were going to do whatever they need to. But now it's supercharged, and we're getting very, very close to it climatically ending. That doesn't mean that if this collapses where the dollar loses essentially its reserve currency status, it doesn't mean that the principle of the dollar will probably exist, but it might not have any value. So the dollar as a reserve currency can go. But I keep thinking about it evolving maybe something like when the British lost their reserve currency status, they still ended up with a pound, but they couldn't have the same influence around the world as it did when they had an empire. But our empire is being threatened. Our budget is being threatened. This monetary policy is being threatened. The dollar is being challenged. And there is a measurement every day. You can look it up, basket of currencies, to give you a hint. But ultimately, if you want to look at what you think is happening to the dollar, and you want to look at it for the past couple years, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, it's you look to the value of the currency. And for our dollar, since the Fed's been involved, it's lost 98% of its value, and that's telling you the dollar is getting much weaker, and it's going to be on the ropes, and it's going to challenge the spending. The spending will continue, but it will raise the question, when are we going to stop it and reassert ourselves and have sensible spending? No, the spending will continue. All the checks will keep flowing. If there's a downturn, we might even think about sending everybody a check. You know, we do that once in a while. And the Social Security checks will keep coming. But they will not have the power to dictate, the value of the currency. When they try to do that, they have to put on wage and price controls, and that really collapses the economy. That's what the authoritarian regimes, all socialist nations have, wage and price controls on them. So we live in very risky times for our liberties, risky times for our economic well-being, and I know a lot of people are waking up and they're getting very frustrated, but the truth is, as bad as the problems are, the solutions are not that difficult, because they all can be found in one very sound principle, and that's the principle of personal liberty. Because when people are allowed to take care and be responsible for themselves and have a system which respects private property and contract rights, things can be sorted out. People get their energy back and they go to work. Today, they're not yet going back to work because of all the mischief going on that has been created by our government and many people who want this to do. Right now, I would say the large majority of American people still want bailouts. The only argument is, how much are you getting? How much am I going to get? This sort of thing. But eventually, they won't be able to do that because there won't be any purchasing power left, and they'll have to say, well, I guess we ought to go back to work. And that's when we should see, and hopefully see, people adapting and adopting the principles of liberty. I think that would answer a lot of our problems and move us much faster toward peace and prosperity. Thank you for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.